Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Grung. I'm Asbet Bedrosian. In this Conversations on Grung episode, we'll be talking about the continuing degradation of Armenian heritage sites in historic Armenian lands and the problems of preserving our monuments and cultural sites against the erosion of time and the threat of destruction by anti-Armenian neighbors. To discuss these issues with our guests, our host today is Simon Maghakyan, who is a researcher of cultural destruction and visiting scholar at Tufts University. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021.
1 year ago this month, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia signed a ceasefire to end the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. Armenians lost the war, as well as access to over 1,000 sacred sites. Today we will discuss the future of Artsakh's monuments under Azerbaijan's control and the monumental fight for their preservation. To talk about these issues, we're joined by entrepreneur and lawyer Virginia Davies, who is the New York-based founding president of Save Armenian Monuments, and Professor Heghnar Watenpaugh, who teaches art and architecture at the University of California, Davis, and is a board member of Save Armenian Monuments. Hello and welcome, Heghnar and Virginia.
Thanks for having me, Simon.
Thank you, Simon. Delighted to be here and participate.
Heghnar, it's the first anniversary of the end of the 2020 war over Artsakh. Could you give us a recap of what has happened so far in terms of cultural heritage in the region?
Thanks, Simon. That is a critical question. And we know that during the war, a lot of monuments were affected, just like the societies in the areas in Karabakh and surrounding regions. Cultural heritage sites, monuments, cultural centers, and cultural institutions were not spared. The main problem has been that since the war, we have not had any kind of internationally recognized fact-finding mission. Access to these areas has been very, very difficult. So in order to have information about what has been going on, we have had to rely on local correspondents or journalists, but access is not equally available in everywhere for everyone. So in short, the situation in terms of cultural heritage in the region looks quite bleak. As you mentioned, many Armenian monuments have come under the control of Azerbaijani military as a result of the agreement of November 2020. We can see from photographs that there are some major infrastructural and urban projects that are being implemented in these areas by the Azerbaijani government or entities hired by the Azerbaijani government. And that includes the transformation, the so-called renovation of Ghazanchetsot's Church, Holy Savior Cathedral in Shushi, which has lost its distinctive umbrella dome. And there has been destruction of cemeteries, graveyards. There are a lot of questions about museums and museum collections, such as the Shushi Fine Arts Museum. So in short, the situation is one where a very large number of monuments have come under Azerbaijani control, and exact information about the fate of these monuments is lacking, and access to them has been severely curtailed.
Thank you for that overview. Virginia, Save Armenian Monuments is almost 1 year old. Could you tell us what the organization has been up to so far?
Thanks, Simon. Let me begin by saying the genesis of Save Armenian Monuments started more than 10 years ago. Obviously, the war and the aftermath of the war accelerated and caused us to found the organization. But the efforts to save our monuments and maintain our monuments in Artsakh really preceded it about 10 years ago, starting in Kashatag, in the village of Hawk, and St. Minos Church, where that church was restored, and in addition to which efforts were made to make certain that the church could remain and become an integral part of village life. And So at the time of the war and shortly after, before the turning over of lands to Azerbaijan, it became clear to me that we needed to found Save Armenian Monuments to make sure that the process of restoring and keeping our churches and monuments in good functioning order and as an integral part of village life, as well in those lands that we continue to hold, but also more, in a sense, more importantly, because they were more at risk, in the lands that were being turned over to Azerbaijan, which included St. Magnus Church. We were going to have basically a full court press. And for that reason, Save Armenian Monuments was founded, really to make sure to protect, to raise awareness, encourage advocacy, encourage the community to work together with respect to our Armenian Christian sites in Artsakh, those parts that are now Azerbaijan, but also, quite frankly, any part of the world where our churches have been or are continue to be at risk. There are a number of stakeholders in this, and I don't have to go through a complete list, but if you pause and think about it, Armenians, the villagers, as we've spoken about in Artsakh, the people of Artsakh, the Armenian diaspora, non-Armenians, Christians, historians, archaeologists, quite frankly, those who are concerned about peace and maintaining peace in the region. All of these really are stakeholders that we think have a legitimate and high priority concern about these very important sites. And our projects for this year try to reflect the hierarchy or the concerns that each of these stakeholders have. So, for example, we have done pilgrimages, we have done community archaeology projects, which include helping villagers clean up sites in the remote villages and cemeteries and make sure those sites are integrated. And we are creating educational training guidelines for our Armenian schools in the diaspora, and happy to say that puzzles are rolling out so that schools can start to teach about the area. We have been part of organizing an international conference, and we've held strategic planning summits in Yerevan to explore solutions to the issues. We believe very much that we have a role to play in trying to assist in acting as sort of a glue or facilitator. There are many people working, as this call will talk about, in the issue of the monuments. But one of the things, and I'll come back to this point, is we have to make sure that our effort is coordinated and consistent and that we work together. And Save Armenian Monuments, that is part of, we believe, what we also bring to the table.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. And for full disclosure, I'm also affiliated with Save Armenian Monuments, but there are important questions to discuss. And I wanted to ask Heghnar about pilgrimages in particular. Could you tell us more about the significance of pilgrimages for individuals, communities, and for the holy places themselves?
So, Simon, as you know, the cultural heritage sites in Karabakh and surrounding regions that we are concerned about, most of these sites are not just old ruins, but they are holy places that have deep significance for living religious communities. So it's not just about the aesthetic qualities of ancient buildings, but this is about preserving the relationship of communities with sacred sites and with special buildings that are important historically, important art historically, aesthetically, but are also important for religious and spiritual reasons. So the pilgrimages are one way in which, through rituals of visitation, prayer, lighting of candles, celebrating religious rituals, and so on, the connection between communities and individuals and places that are special to that faith is maintained. And from a broader perspective, pilgrimages are part of the kinds of actions through which an individual and a community reclaims their religious rights, right? I mean, freedom of religion is an important human right, and in order to maintain one's rights, one has to claim them. So the local communities in Artsakh and surroundings have been engaging for a long time in various kinds of pilgrimages and other kinds of engagements with their holy sites. And they have had to adapt how they do these things in situations where a holy site is no longer accessible to Armenians, or in cases where the holy sites are under the protection of Russian peacekeepers. For example, the monastery of Amaras, which is continues to be within Armenian-controlled territories, but is very, very close to the line of contact with Azerbaijani forces. So its safety is a concern. And Armenian communities in Karabakh have been mobilizing to continue practices of pilgrimage at Amaras, but now that involves negotiating with the peacekeepers, making new safety arrangements, and so on. For those of us who are connected through our faith to these sites but do not live in Karabakh, who live in Armenia or in diaspora, as Virginia and I do, for us it has become more difficult to access these sites because of the changed situation since the conclusion of the Second Karabakh War. So we believe at Save Armenian Monuments that organized pilgrimages involving international persons of faith for whom these sites are important is really critical in engaging the international community with the religious significance of these sites, and to maintain a continuity of practice of faith-based practices at these sites. And of course now it is not so easy given the changed situation in Karabakh and the difficulties of entering the Karabakh areas and accessing these sites.
Sima, if I may just jump in there with Heghnar, one of the Aziri points has been in argument is that, and you will read it and you'll hear about it, is that, oh, well, we'll let any Azeri citizen, Christian citizen, I mean, they can go to the sites, or an Armenian as opposed to a non-Armenian diasporan, we'll figure out a way to get them into areas which may be now controlled. So one of the problems with this argument that we need to make, and that should be made, is that it fundamentally doesn't understand what a pilgrimage is for a Christian, and from a religious point of view. And the history of pilgrimages actually goes back to before Christianity, but going all the way back to Igor's travels, and when she spoke about going to Armenian sites, which is more than 1,000 years, probably 1,500 years ago. Pilgrimage isn't just about the people who live close by going. Pilgrimages are, and we're not alone in this, obviously, the Muslim community does this too, so it's something that certainly the Azeris should be familiar with. Pilgrimage is a trek to a religious site, not necessarily within one's own community. And so we should not allow the argument to be made, well, it's okay, we're not denying access because anybody in the community can get there. That's not the narrow definition. That's not the definition of a pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is not defined so narrowly.
Thank you, Virginia. Yes, obviously Muslims should understand pilgrimage, right? They have the Hajj, and Armenians have also engaged in pilgrimage for centuries. Heghnar, just a quick question. Do you have a favorite site in Artsakh? I know Virginia mentioned Sub Minas in Hague because she helped renovate it. Do you have, like, if you had to pick one, do you have a favorite church that you like to pay a pilgrimage to?
That's a tough one because, as you know, there are many special places. A church that I find very special is Kansasar, which is roughly in the middle of Karabakh today. And a site that is also very special to me is the Gohar Ağa Mosque in Shushi. It's a beautiful 18th century mosque that was repaired in the fall of 2019 by an Armenian NGO. When it was under Armenian control. But there are these are the big monumental buildings, but there are also some small shrines, even informal shrines in in villages, individual khachkars that you see covered in candle wax from the candles that people have lit on them in order to make prayers. So it really, but Karabakh is a sacred landscape and sacred to the many communities that have lived there. For centuries, and that very special character must be preserved and must be nurtured.
Thank you, Elna. Actually, I'm going to answer my own question as well. My number one pick, I think, would be Saint Yerisha Arakal Monastery up in the mountains, established in the 4th century, expanded in the 13th. I just, the photos I've seen, it's such a dramatic view of a church with 7 chapels that, from one view are basically going from tall to short. So it's really incredible. Unfortunately, Armenians have lost access. Not that it's entirely under Azerbaijan's control, but from my understanding, the trail to it is no longer accessible. But I wanted to come back to the issue of what can be done for the monuments. And I know that Virginia has been following the recent cases brought by Armenia and Azerbaijan at the International Court of Justice. So I wanted to ask you, Virginia, to tell us more about Armenia's ask for the protection of cultural monuments and if there is a legal precedent for this.
Thanks, Simone. Well, let me, as a lawyer, begin with a usual disclaimer, which is this is not my area of practice. And so I share with you my personal thoughts as opposed to my legal analysis, as this case is now before the court. I think people probably know that the International Court of Justice was established in 1945. It is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. And Armenia has also asked for provisional measures to be taken. I'll talk a little bit about the provisional measures for the monuments, but it's also important to note, and actually if you read or if you happen to have listened to the proceedings, you'll note that from my perspective, a great deal of time was spent on 2 other matters. I'm not going to focus on those matters. A great deal of attention, and rightly so, was focused on the prisoners of war. And a significant amount of submission material was on that. And also a great deal of some effort, a great deal, not as much as the prisoners of war, was focused on Azerbaijani espousal of ethnic hatred. And so those are important and matters, obviously, in the provisional request. But as it relates to what we're talking about here today, there were 3 requests for provisional measures that were made by the Republic of Armenia. The first was that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Azerbaijan protect the right to access to enjoy Armenian historic, cultural, and religious heritage sites, and that they do so by terminating, preventing, prohibiting, and punish the vandalization, destruction, or alteration of those sites, and to allow all Armenians to visit places of worship. The second was that Azerbaijan facilitate and refrain from placing any impediment on efforts to protect and preserve Armenian historic, cultural, and religious heritage. And the third is that they take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of all evidence relating to any allegation of harm, if you want to use that word, to the sites. Probably doesn't surprise anyone to hear that Azerbaijan rejected all 3 of these claims, saying that Armenia had failed to meet the standard legal standard for provisional measures. And I'm now speaking of provisional measures. Relating to Armenia putting in issue Azerbaijan's reconstruction and restoration efforts in what is now Azerbaijan's territory, the Azerbaijanis submitted that these were really, what they did in their submission was they went back. So they said, well, these were really always Azerbaijani lands. It is their own territories. And so that Armenia is actually asking for relief relating to towns and villages that were destroyed, Azerbaijani towns that were destroyed over 30 years ago. And they note several Azerbaijani sites where there was destruction of mosques and some cultural monuments. In making that argument, they reiterated, which was the point I made earlier, that of course any Christians living in Azerbaijan will be able to use the sites, and they underscored that that is Azerbaijani law, although they did not submit, to the best of my knowledge, any evidence that, of course, that was happening. And it has also been, I know that a submission, a UN recounter submission, pointed out that Armenian diasporans, myself included, had tried to have access to sites now under Azerbaijani control and have been denied. The second argument, which I had heard nothing about anywhere other than in this submission, was Azerbaijan said, well, we can't allow broad-based access right now to the sites because Armenia during the war put so many landmines all over the territory that has now been handed back that it would be it's impossible we have not cleared all the landmines, and so to ensure the safety and security of people regardless of their ethnic or national origin, we just can't allow access. Again, I have not heard that argument before. Others may have, and I don't have no evidence was submitted really of the scope of it, and best I could see, Armenia has not answered that. Perhaps now they have, but in the printed material or the online material, it is not yet answered. And their final argument was that Armenia has not pointed to any specific ongoing evidence that could demonstrate an immediate risk of real, imminent, irreparable harm to sites. Basically, the Azeris, I think, are saying, this is our sovereign territory. And why would we have, as a sovereign nation, have a duty why would Armenia, another sovereign nation, have a right to consultation with respect to monuments, buildings, etc., however you want to describe them, within our sovereign territory, leaving aside the question of a right to access of religious sites. The other point that I would like to make about the Azeri argument is that they cited two examples of inconsistencies in Armenian submissions having to do with the age of churches and the degree to which churches were actually being used as worship sites. So, I think the latter one is important. They are saying, and it goes to one of the comments Heghnar made, that, how long have these churches, all these sites, actually been used for matters of religion? I think it's important for readers to understand that we are in totally new, charted legal area here. There has not been a great deal of litigation with respect to religious monuments, cultural preservation at the international level. And so the court is really in territory where, really sowing new legal area. And I have to say, in a way, it's not surprising if, Armenia is asking for provisional measures, and that's also difficult. And so you might see the court take some time here in deciding. And even when they do decide, you're really in uncharted area. And we are asking that a new model that would somehow allow us not only right to access, but also a right to preserve within another sovereign country be somehow permitted under some organization design. And it may cause the court to wander into new areas of law. So for the listeners who are familiar, of course, you'll know that the whole issue of self-determination and Artsakh, one of the issues is the minority peoples allowed access, able to engage in their cultural heritage, their religious rights, etc. So it may take on, have a broader argument. The other part is obviously there is an argument when we speak about Armenians, we, because of our history and that we, historical reasons, we are scattered. The word Armenian and who is an Armenian cannot be narrowly defined as to just somebody who is a citizen or lives in Armenia or in Artsakh. So the court is being asked to consider a number of new issues, and I think it could lead to some very interesting legal developments, not just for Armenians, but for people who are concerned about generally cultural, historical monuments.
Heghnar, I have a follow-up question. You wrote about the ICJ cases in your Newsweek op-ed, and in which you raised a legal question, but I had a feeling it's more than a legal question, and that's whether intentional destruction of cultural heritage is racial discrimination. So how would you answer that question yourself as a scholar of cultural heritage?
Thank you, Simon. So again, like Virginia, I want to make a disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an art historian who is interested in how cultural heritage is treated in legal environments. So the argument that the Armenian sites, Armenian cultural heritage sites in the areas that have come under Azerbaijani control are at immediate risk because of racial hatred was the argument made by the Republic of Armenia in front of the ICJ, so the International Court of Justice. So as I'm sure the readers know, the International Court of Justice is the main judicial organ of the United States, and it's the forum where states can sue each other. And it's a very difficult forum because if these are issues that can be solved relatively easily, they don't get to the ICJ. So the court is really looking at very, very difficult, very complicated issues involving two member states of the United Nations. In this particular litigation, it concerns the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, a convention that is known by the acronym of CERD. It's a convention to which both Armenia and Azerbaijan are parties. And so it's through that, that's sort of the wedge. It's on the basis of CERD that Armenia has made their arguments. And of course, Azerbaijan, exactly a week after Armenia instituted their lawsuit at the ICJ, Azerbaijan instituted a lawsuit of their own, also involving violations of CERD. So the Republic of Armenia in their filing, and Azerbaijan also in their filing, alleged that among other issues, I mean, there are many issues involved in these lawsuits, as Virginia mentioned, prisoners of war, landmines, etc. But we're focusing here on cultural heritage. So both lawsuits argue that cultural heritage has been destroyed and is in imminent danger of being destroyed due to racial hatred. So it's a task for the court to determine whether they agree with that argument. Do I agree with that argument as an art historian? There is a whole field of cultural heritage studies, memory studies, genocide studies that looks at how cultural heritage is an area where persecuted groups really suffer. Cultural heritage of persecuted groups is often targeted not as a casualty of war or as collateral damage of genocide or ethnic cleansing, etc. But it's the destruction of the cultural heritage of the targeted group is often central to things like genocide, ethnic cleansing, persecution of targeted groups. So the focus on cultural heritage really shows that cultural heritage is not separate from a society. It's not a separate and autonomous area of social life. It is part of social life. And so when a group is targeted for destruction or discrimination, their cultural heritage, their language, their religion, their folklore is often...
Heghnar, that's why I think they may look at the self-determination law.
I agree with you.
Armenia did not argue it.
I mean, I agree that we are in uncharted territory. I mean, there is not a lot of previous cases in front of the ICJ that are about CERD, and the one that a lot of legal experts are citing, Georgia versus Russian Federation, that did not end well, right? It was extinguished. So we really are in uncharted territory. We're going to see what the court decides. It may take a very long time. It's very unpredictable. But if they do agree to Armenia's argument about imminent danger to cultural heritage sites, that might open the door to some international intervention. Of course, the court, even if the court grants provisional measures, whether a sovereign state implements them is a completely different question.
Yes.
Heghnar, don't you think, I mean, that was one of the interesting parts about the conference, is that I know the tendency is always to go to the law and look for the legal solution. But I think there are other channels. And so, for example, when you see religious leaders coming together of different parts of the Christian church, saying, in Russia, of course, they also include an Azerbaijani Oman, I think, we need to find a religious, or we need to help in finding a solution to this. Not just a legal, ask the courts to do it, but fundamentally, we have a role in it, because these are sort of, I hate to use the word, but are religious sites. And it's not just a political matter, it is a religious matter. And it was good to see religious leaders saying, let us come together and try and work as also part of this process to come to a solution.
Yeah, that is very positive. And one does hope that the litigation in front of the ICJ is only part of a broader types of diplomatic, religious, other kinds of engagement that end up producing positive results. So it's a very difficult situation, for sure.
Yes, and I appreciate the angle of engaging religious leaders, as Virginia mentioned. I think October 13th is when Azerbaijan's Sheikhul Islam and Armenia's Catholicos met in Moscow. So hopefully those conversations will continue. I also wanted to, I don't know if you watched the conference they had, it was interesting. The face of both the Catholicos and Sheikhul Islam, they both looked very somber. They both looked very concerned. It was very different from when you see, politicians meet and, try to sort of bully sometimes each other. These were people who seemed really concerned about the situation of churches, of the people in the region. That can give us some hope for the future. But what has been giving some people hope are the activities of Save Armenian Monuments. Of course, this is a monumental task, and there are so many stakeholders in this. But Virginia, to close the program, could you tell us what the plans of Save Armenian Monuments are for the near future?
We will continue to respond to developments on the ground, and we are a nimble organization, so we are able to respond quickly. But if we continue along our vein that we hope to try to continue to be what I'll call a good facilitator and bring together all the stakeholders that are really trying to work to find a solution in territories that have been turned over, the lands that have been turned over, to preserving and providing access to our sites and allow religious freedom to happen and worship at those sites, as well as making sure, of course, they remain in good repair. On the ground in Artsakh, I also think that we have a very important role in terms of looking after, helping villagers, helping communities look after the sites that we have. It's important to worry about the sites that we are no longer under control, but we also have a great deal that remains under our control. And we want to make certain that the diaspora remains engaged, goes, participates, that those who live close to them, that they continue to have those sites integrated into their daily life. We believe at Save Armenian Monuments there is a great deal of work to do in the diaspora to teach about the importance in our heritage and today of these sites to our ongoing practice of faith. And so it's important that we work together with stakeholders, include the church, for example, to facilitate that ongoing learning in the diaspora as well. So there's a great deal of work to be done. When I went to St. Minos at the time that just as the church was going to be turned over, I said, and I repeat today about Save Armenian Monuments, we are not giving up on our churches, our monuments that are now in have lands that have been turned over. We will continue to work to preserve them, to be able to have access. We acknowledge that it may take some time. It may take generations, quite frankly. We certainly have experience in other locations, including Western Turkey, that it may take some time. But if we teach our people, and if we teach our world, other Christians, other members of society, whether they're Christian or not, about the importance of these sites, their role in our history and in the history of all peoples, quite frankly, I think that eventually we will save these monuments, we will have access to them, and be preserved for generations to come. And that is the hope and dream and work of Save Armenian Monuments.
All right, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Heghnar and Virginia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That concludes this Conversations on Grung episode, and we hope you found it useful. As always, we invite your feedback. You can find us on most social media and podcast platforms or our website, grung.org. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, like our pages, and follow us on social media. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.